Good morning. This hearing will come to order. I welcome our subcommittee members and witnesses testifying before us today. Over the last 15 years, the Department of Defense has become increasingly reliant on the use of government contractors. When used properly, this public and private partnership can both improve our national security and at the same time preserve limited government resources. But this work requires competent and timely oversight. To that end, financial audits of defense contracts can play a vital role in ensuring that expenditures paid by the government for goods and services are fair and reasonable. It also ensures that taxpayers are getting the best bang for their buck. Within the Department of Defense, the Defense Contract Audit Agency, or DCAA, is charged with this critical mission. Today's hearing seeks to learn more about where the auditing process is working and identify any shortcomings with current accounting efforts. I'm always looking for productive ways to improve government performance. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about their feedback on the current auditing system. At the outset, I have several overarching questions about how the audit process is working within DCAA. In particular, for years, DCAA has had a significant backlog of incurred cost audits. These audits are meant to identify instances where the government might have overpaid. However, as I understand it, it has been taking an average more than 2 years from the time DCAA receives the information necessary to conduct an incurred cost audit to the date the audit report is issued. These delays can create problems for government contract managers. Their efforts to recover improper costs are slowed. It also means managers do not have important financial information available soon after an expenditure takes place when the information is most important. From a business perspective, this delay can also create economic burdens. I look forward to hearing from our panel of industry experts on how these delays impact the private sector. I also have questions about how efficiently DCAA is performing these incurred cost audits. Although they account for the most significant portion of total costs audited each year, these audits only account for a relatively small amount of reported savings. I want to understand how much these audits are costing American taxpayers compared to the return from that cost. On a related note, I'm interested to hear from our witnesses about how DCAA audit practices compare to what is commercially acceptable in the private sector. Perhaps there are lessons to be learned outside of government that could improve defense contract audit performance. The bottom line is simple. We all want a fair, efficient, and timely auditing process that works for all interested parties. I look forward to everyone's views this morning in addressing this important topic. But before I introduce the witnesses, I turn to Mr. Moulton, the Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee ranking member, for any opening remarks that he would like to make.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. The topic of our hearing today should be important to anyone concerned about accountability, efficiency, and transparency in our multi-billion-dollar defense sector. The Defense Contract Audit Agency is the government organization charged with auditing the $287 billion in defense contracts that the Pentagon and other agencies make with private businesses every year. That makes it one of the main organizations whose job it is to ensure that the taxpayers' defense dollars are well spent and not stolen, wasted, or otherwise abused. DCAA also helps the government negotiate more competitive prices from the private sector. These roles, in which DCAA holds a public trust, are important to keep in mind as we discuss the pace of DCAA's auditing process. According to their annual report, DCAA currently has a backlog of incurred cost audits that it needs to reduce to ensure defense contracts are not unnecessarily delayed. But as we try to reduce this backlog, we should also be wary of exactly what proposals are made to do so, and anything that could undermine the public trust. One thing under consideration is proposals to privatize the functions of DCAA and hand this important work over to private auditors. I am a strong believer in public-private partnerships, and I've personally advocated for them in many sectors, including transportation projects in which I've worked. In this case, however, I caution that early estimates suggest privatization could cost the taxpayers about 30% more, and we would also be positioning a small number of auditing companies to oversee defense contractors with whom there would likely be conflicts of interest. Obviously, the history of Enron and the financial crisis suggests that we have to be very careful in this situation. We should also keep in mind the origin and state of DCAA's backlog as we develop defense reform policies. DCAA first developed a backlog when the number of defense contracts and expenditures ballooned during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. DCAA has certainly made mistakes. In 2010, it recognized this problem, hired 400 additional workers, and adopted new strategies to begin reducing the backlog. Those efforts have in fact succeeded so far, and as you can see from the graph of the backlog presented in the testimony, it has been shrinking by about 4,000 contracts per year to the point where about 4,677 are left in the queue. When the pace has slowed, it has been due, more recently, it has been due to sequestration and now President Trump's hiring freeze. This evidence suggests that we can make a lot of progress on this backlog by properly resourcing DCAA's mission, mitigating the impact of sequestration and hiring freezes, and ensuring DCAA has enough capacity to cope with an unexpected increase in defense spending. I look forward to the testimony this morning to understanding better how we can make reforms and improve the process and ultimately preserve the important mission that DCAA does for our taxpayers and for our defense.
Good morning, Chairwoman Hartzler, Ranking Member Moulton, and committee members. I am John Panetta, the Senior Director of Government Accounting at Raytheon in Waltham, Massachusetts. I am here today on behalf of and representing the Financial Executives International Committee on Government Business. Defense contract auditing has been a matter of discussion in both the private sector and the government for several years. The timeliness of audits, and in particular final incurred cost rate audits, are at the center of the conversation. Let me start by talking about how we got here. The current state is due to a series of events starting in 2008 when reports surfaced critical of DCAA audit practices. DCAA's reaction was to stress audit quality and independence above all other considerations. Quality standards over a period of years were in a state of flux. New untrained auditors were added without sufficient supervision, and audit schedules were not considered. From 2006 to 2015, DCAA's staff grew by approximately 20%. Incurred cost audits that were issued over that period were generally incredibly long and packed with immaterial items. This resulted in the number of audits being issued per DCAA employee declining by approximately 90%. In 2012, the Federal Acquisition Regulation Council, at DCAA's urging, expanded the requirements for certified incurred cost proposals in the regulations by adding 30 items for the submission of final indirect rates. Many of these items are not relative to final indirect rates. DCAA used this FAR change to retroactively reject many previously accepted contractor proposals. This action further delayed the settlement of final rates as contractors needlessly created complicated informational schedules for DCAA that we view as having little, if any, value. Recently, some progress has been made. DCAA has put a dent in the audit backlog through the use of multi-year audit techniques. Contractor resources have been strained supporting these multi-year audits, and that is not sustainable over the long run. We are not where we need to be. More needs to be done. The backlog of audits is merely a symptom of underlying issues. Working off the backlog by applying resources will not prevent the condition from returning after the spotlight has moved on to other priorities. Excuse me. In today's environment, risk management is a buzzword, and risk avoidance is the practice. Adopting an outlook of risk avoidance drives behavior. Perfection becomes the standard, and perfection is an expensive commodity. There is no question perfection is something that we should all strive to achieve. However, if the cost to implement a perfect system exceeds the risks that are being addressed, we are collectively wasting resources that could better be applied in other areas. The CGB believes that getting back to basics, implementing efficient audit management practices, and changing how success is measured with respect to oversight will go a long way in addressing the root cause of the issues we are addressing. Emphasizing audit practices such as establishing materiality thresholds, relying on the work of others, meeting schedules, And using documentation standards that are accepted by other audit groups will all speed up the process without shifting significant risks to the government. For example, a company that has received a passing grade from a CPA firm with respect to the requirements of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act has already run a gauntlet of audits. Why should DCAA retest underlying systems and transactions that have already been validated for financial reporting purposes? The current measure of success at DCAA is the amount of annual findings. That is akin to paying a CPA firm upon the receipt of a clean opinion. That works against the requirements for independence, and CPAs would certainly grab the attention of the SEC for that. This measure creates churn in the acquisition process. There are a number of examples where DCAA's implementation of the FAR to generate those findings resulted in legal disputes overturning their positions. This again wastes both the government and contractor resources. Success should be measured by the completion of a timely, quality audit that promotes and provides reasonable assurance of an effective acquisition process. These actions, together with the introduction of independent CPA firms to conduct audits at DoD, as they do at other executive departments, will result in the fundamental change that is required for the acquisition process to function as envisioned in the guiding principles of the FAR. Thank you very much. I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
I'd like to ask all of you, I guess, and start with you, Mr. Panetta, because you mentioned multi-year audits in your testimony, and DCAA has indicated to us, and she just testified that even after the backlog is eliminated, the agency would like to see more multi-year auditing done as the standard practice. So how does that practice compare to private sector norms, and what do you think of that practice for both audits and the backlog and for new ones going forward?
Well, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. In comparing that to private sector norms, in the private sector, audits are done on a concurrent basis, and we don't see multi-year audits. You know, DCAA audits are retrospective, and what we see when we look, say, at our financial statement audits, the auditors are auditing the year as we're going along, such that when the year is complete, a couple months after the year is closed, we issue our financial statements and they issue their opinion. So we don't really see multi-year audits, we see concurrent audits. And I see a problem with doing multi-year audits from a DCAA perspective, and it's because it's very difficult for contractors. We like to staff at a level of activity. And normally, audit activity will go along at a certain level. When you go to multi-year audits, you're going to have peaks and valleys and spikes. And to support that activity, it strains the organization because you either have to be overstaffed for part of the year or you have to bring in excess resources otherwise that aren't familiar. So we would rather see a regular cadence of an annual audit that's done quickly and concurrently.
Obviously, votes are occurring, but I would like to visit with you more about the concurrent. How would that change if the DCAA would do concurrent rather than after? What changes would there?
You know, years ago, they used to do concurrent auditing as a practice. They would roll it out, and what would happen is, as the year would go along, they would test particular accounts that were, as costs were incurred, and contractors would, say, make adjustments as they found things, such that when the year was over, the audit work was complete, the findings were known, and the contractors could actually make the adjustments before we made the submission, such that, I mean, that to me would be nirvana, in that when you make your submission 6 months after the year, it's already been audited in terms of the underlying information, and adjustments have been made, and you're done. I mean, that would be a great goal to try to achieve.
Well, we've had a very good discussion with a lot of information here today, and we want to continue this discussion, and we'll look at your further into your testimony and these ideas moving forward. But we really appreciate your insights. Thank you for being here today, and this hearing is now adjourned.